Greetings, everyone. It's top of the hour. We will be getting started in a moment. Just give people a chance to click their links and join us. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to sharing some great content focused on last week's Past Data Community Summit. Randy and Scott will be sharing in just a moment, so stand by. Thank you. Okay, it's about 90 seconds for everybody to get started. So I think Randy and Scott, you can go.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for coming. This was really exciting for us to, have the past summit back. Can't say enough good about the team at Redgate and the folks at Microsoft and everyone who really, worked to put this together. Obviously, the last couple of years with everything that's gone on with the pandemic, the past organization,
changes,
dissolved, SQL Saturday kind of went away. And so there was a lot of uncertainty. So I was super excited when I heard that Redgate had acquired the assets and was going to do this because I've worked with Redgate products and with Redgate as a company and as a friend of Redgate for many years now, and I knew they'd do a great job, and they did. I think for a year one with them putting this together, virtual conference, I think it went really well, and I think one of the things that I really have always loved is how adaptable and innovative people are. And you've really seen that over the last couple of years with this transition that nobody was expecting, and not just Redgate, Microsoft Pass or whatever, but just conferences in general and creating the environments to make a virtual conference as like a real conference as you possibly could. It's been really cool to see how they've done it. So excited to just kind of go through and talk about some of our takeaways and some stuff that we'll be talking about and doing some webinars and content and things going forward. So Scott, you want to give us your kind of?
I agree. I think it was good to see it back. I think it was a good effort to try to bring back this conference that we've always been a part of for a long time. But at the same, I like their flexibility in being adaptive to, hey, we're still going to give you good content, but do it in a different way. I think this is a great springboard to hopefully doing something in person next year.
Yep.
Right. But you still got really great content. Right?
And that'll be interesting, right? So next year's conference is supposed to be a hybrid conference, is what they're saying. So it will be a physical conference located here in Seattle. So for those who've been attending past for many years, that's kind of like coming home.
Yeah.
And I actually moved to the area. I'm in Redmond, so that's where we're sitting here in Redmond, and looking forward to see how that works out. One of the things I read on a blog kind of wrap up is, it'll be interesting to see if there's a physical virtual option, what that looks like for attendance. And are people going to have a harder time getting approved to travel to a conference if it can be virtual? And because there's so many things about virtual or physical presence, and it's not the content so much, right? I mean,
the networking.
We can have these videos and watch the sessions, and it's pretty in some ways because you can see the screen better, the demos and everything. It's better than live, right?
Yeah.
But it's the networking, talking with people, meeting people, the after events, things like that. So
having that Q&A, and being able to approach the speaker and go ahead.
And the number one thing is it was free, right?
Yeah.
I think that was the thing. I think last year that was a bit of, for me, and I understand why it had to cost when Pass put on the virtual conference. That was like what, $500 or something like that. A lot of bigger vendor sponsored conferences at the same time were all free because they were virtual conferences, and I think that was and I haven't heard attendance numbers or anything from that, but this was great. So I guess we should advance the slides. But by the way, we don't have a real like set, you know, slide deck content, whatever for this. Scott and I both watched a bunch of content and took notes, and we're just gonna kind of sit here and talk.
Yep.
So, and you know, we'd love, and Jason, feel free to interrupt us if folks have, you know, sessions they saw or things that they, you know, are curious about that they want us to talk about. We're happy to do that. So if you've been to our webinars before, you know who I am, Randy Knight. I'm the founder of Sql Solutions Group. We've been doing this with SSG since 2010, and I've been, you know, doing databases and SQL Server specifically for pushing 30 years, 25 years, long time. So, and we started these webinars, this webinar series. You know, we didn't do webinars for a long time because it was kind of who needs another webinar, right? But with the pandemic and you know, just wanting to connect with people. So, and then Scott, you want to?
Yep, Scott Klein, again, been doing, hopefully you know who I am. Been same thing with Randy, been doing SQL Server a long time, been with SSG for just over a year, 15 months, I think. But like Randy, been doing SQL Server a long time, spent time with Microsoft and got into the, you know, the Azure data platform. So did a lot of Azure and Azure SQL database and managed instance and things like that. So, you know, my focus for this was I watched all the kind of the Azure things, and Randy, I think, focused on the on-premises things. So we're gonna, hopefully we got the span the gamut.
Absolutely, yeah. We tried to be a little bit strategic in terms of content. Just, you know, the obligatory marketing slide about SSG. Again, we've been doing this for 11 years now. We do everything from managed services, remote DBA, full stack health checks, and of course, you know, consulting. So pretty much anything in the Microsoft data platform world, we can handle. We're definitely, you know, more focused on the relational databases, relational engine. We don't do a ton of BI work, but we do some. So we're, you know, we're all about SQL Server. So we used to say we were a SQL Server consultancy. Now we're a Microsoft data platform. And I think in the conference, I heard people using the words Azure data platform to include on-prem, right? So whatever Microsoft wants to call their data platform, that's what we're about.
We'll go with.
So just a couple of slides here that we put together on, you know, a few of the sessions. And if you download the slides or see the video, these are links that we saw that we liked. It says Randy's favorite sessions, and I hate to do that because I see lots of content and I have lots of friends who spoke. I didn't include my own session here. I figured that would probably be.
I just have that back. My session is my favorite.
But you know, the day one keynote, the Microsoft keynote, I thought was really good, really well done, a good mix of demos and new things. I was, you know, super excited to see what, and granted that was kind of my focus, but with just a lot of SQL Server v.next or 2022 content and some on-premises focus. Right, because that's been, you know, one of the rightly or wrongly accusations a lot of people feel like with Microsoft is that everything is so cloud focused that, you know, on-prem stuff is not getting the love that it should. So I was excited to see a lot of 2022 stuff. You'll see my other two sessions were also both 2022 related. Bob's stuff is always great. Right, but just his introducing SQL Server 2022, talked about some different things. So as we get into like talking details of sessions and things like that, that's kind of getting some of my takeaways. And then Pedro Lopes did a great job, really digging into the intelligent query processing stuff that's in v.next and how that works, and I'm excited to talk about that as well. Scott?
Yep. So my focus was, like I mentioned earlier, the cloud data platform stuff. So my three sessions, I wouldn't, like Randy, I wouldn't call them my favorite because there was quite a few I watched. but I started, you know, we've got some customers doing MI. So, you know, I wanted to know what was, you know, what's coming with them, managed Azure SQL Database Managed Instance and kind of what they're doing around that. So that was a good one, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. Internally, we're doing a lot of stuff around Azure with Azure Arc. And starting to, you know, a lot of our customers are starting to ask about that. So I want to know, hey, what's coming with Azure Arc? What's the new things around Azure Arc? So focused on that. Watch that. And that was an interesting one. And both of those sessions, by the way, had more than one speaker. Like the MI had 5 speakers. Arc had 4. And then I had 2 for the third one, but I loved Grant Fritchie's identify poorly performing queries, because I can always learn. There's some things I can always learn from that, and even though that's not just SQL Server, that's on you know, that's cloud-based as well. So we'll get into that. And there's actually some things that I found quite interesting around that. So those are 3 good ones. We'll talk about those.
All right. So let's talk just about, you know, we'll just kind of go through some of those topics. So,
Sure.
So SQL Server 2022, and you know, as I said, I was really encouraged. Now, let's also admit this is somewhat, I wouldn't call it vaporware, but we're very early in this cycle, right? This,
Yeah.
you know, SQL Server 2022 just barely went into private preview. And you know, you can sign up for the early access program, and would encourage you to do so if you know, if you're in a position to test it. And if you're not familiar with the early access program, basically, you know, you fill out a form, and what they want to know is you know, what applications, what are you doing, you know, how are you going to help us, Microsoft, you know, improve the product, right? So it isn't like a public preview where like, hey, cool, this is in beta, let's download it and play with it.
Okay.
You know, they want you to participate, right? But I'm again just really encouraged by some of the things that we saw in terms of, you know, a lot of the improvements we've seen in the cloud, in Azure SQL, Azure SQL Database, Managed Instance, things like that. Are being brought into the relational engine, right? So, you know, I'm really looking forward to it. A few of the things, and I am just gonna switch over to my notes here real quick. Probably, you know, intelligent query processing over the last, you know, several releases, starting with like, you know, 2016, 2017, 2019, and 2022. You know, intelligent query processing and all the things around that are a big part of what Microsoft has focused on, right? And you know, you could kind of wrap this up in, you know, we've always worked to, you know, Microsoft, the optimizer has always been improved, and the, you know, Temp Db and things like that. And we can talk about what some of those specifics are, but starting with 2016, the focus, I think, has been, and we're seeing a lot of stuff in 22, performance improvements without changing your code.
Okay.
Right. That's you heard that a lot in Bob's session and Pedro's session, you know, that, you know, what can we do to improve the product so that if you just upgrade to this version and run your workload, it's going to be better. It's going to be faster. You know, new features are great, right? From the standpoint of, you know, new T-SQL features, things like that. But that's all like, hey, here's this new feature. Go change your application to use it. And so the things like, you know, they made some changes for, so in 2016, we got the, or 2014, I guess it was, we got the new cardinality estimator, right? And we have had to have, you know, deal with this legacy cardinality estimation because they made some pretty big changes in the cardinality estimator, and you may have applications that, you know, don't behave well with that, right? Well, in 2022, they've made some changes to, you know, kind of work around that, right? So that you'll be able to do that. So that's a really good one. The parameter sensitive plans in the cache, I can't begin to describe how big this is going to be. I mean, for the things I've seen so far, if there's one reason to upgrade to 2022, it's going to be that, right? And if you're not familiar with parameter sensitive plans, or if you've probably heard the term parameter sniffing, if you think about the way SQL Server compiles a query, right? You execute a query, store procedure, whatever. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to look in the plan cache and it's going to say, hey, is there a plan? And if there's not, which, when you first boot up your server, first time you run this, there's not going to be, the optimizer goes through and it comes up with an execution plan, right? And it's going to use the parameters that were specified for that initial time we called that query for that execution plan. And what happens is that may be great for that, let's call it that version of the query, but we've all seen situations where depending upon the parameters, right, maybe it's a date range that's going to give us, 200 rows versus 2,000 rows, right, or even more, right? And so we see different parameters, different plans. Maybe with these parameters, we're using an index seek, and with these, we have to use a scan to be most efficient. Well, if you ended up creating the plan with the scan, and that's what's in cache, then when the parameters come along that benefit from a seek, that's potentially going to be a lot slower than it needs to be, right? And so we have, lots of methods that have been developed over the years to help deal with this. But sometimes you just get a bad plan, and you have to go either, hopefully you're far enough along in this that you know how to remove just a specific plan from the cache. That's best. A lot of people will dump the procedure cache, which dumps all the plans. That's a pretty big hammer. But a lot of people don't even know how to do that, so they just restart the SQL Server, right? So we're going to dump the buffer cache, we're going to disconnect all the users, but it's been a problem, right? And so in SQL Server 2022, they basically have created a way that the same SQL text, SQL hash, as it were, can have multiple plans in the cache. And I'm really looking forward to that, because when we do health checks, parameter sniffing and parameter sensitive plans, and every query is not that way, right? There are some store procedures that are going to run the same way every time, right? So there's this entire kind of topic of parameter sensitive queries, or parameter sensitive store procedures, right? So I think that's going to be a really big one. So those are good ones. Scott, let's talk. I'm talking about 2022 a lot. Okay. Let's talk about MI for a minute. All right. So I was going to joke. During the Q&A, everybody's job is to get Randy to say parameter sensitive plans. Pretty much. So all right, let's talk MI. PSP. I'm just going to start saying PlayStation Pro. That's awesome. Hopefully I didn't violate some Sony thing by saying that, but the cease and desist letters. That's right. All right. What's interesting was, I looked up, I started watching the MI one, and, all the sessions were an hour. This one was 2.5 hours, right? And it's because they covered so much stuff. And I'll try to summarize things here, because what made it fun was our friend Nico kind of led this discussion, and good friend of ours, and love that guy to death. But what he pointed out several things. In the last year, there have been 25 enhancements alone just to MI, and watch the session, you can just figure out what those are. But they announced through the session, they announced several things. And if you don't know what MI, let me just give a quick background of what MI is. This is, if you're familiar with Azure SQL Database, this is, now I have access to the entire managed instance, right? I can basically have access to the entire instance, right? Multiple databases, engine, everything, right? I have access to jobs, agent, everything, right? All your instance level things that you don't get with SQL Database, you can get with MI. And it's been, when it first came out,
there was, it was kind of a challenge to migrate. And so they've made some huge improvements, from authentication and things like that. The big thing that, that talking about this hybrid scenario, the big thing that they announced was this thing called Sql Mi Link, right? And this is, they call it near real-time replication of your on-premises databases from SQL Server to a managed instance. So basically saying, I'm not ready to go to cloud fully, so I'm going to basically replicate my data from on-premises. So it allows me to take, data, get it close to, close to the cloud, but allow me to, from on-premises, take advantage of all the other Azure data services as I get close to the cloud, right? And the way it does this is through distributed availability groups. Basically, just connect these two environments, right? And then when I'm ready to go, ready to migrate, it makes it so much more. It makes it that much easier to get to managed instance because I'm already replicating my data, right?
Right. And so they're basically bringing availability groups to MI.
To MI,
right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And for those that aren't familiar with the distributed availability group, this has been around for a while.
Yeah.
I don't remember which version, but essentially, availability group typically is one SQL cluster.
Sure, yep.
Right? There's no shared storage, but there is a Windows server cluster. And so then you'll have nodes in one data center, nodes in another data center. Well, what a distributed AG does is allow you to say, here's a cluster in data center A, here's a cluster center in data center B, and they can have replicas from the same availability group on both. And so essentially what they've done is they said, hey, this data center B for your DR site or however you want to do this can have a replica that's on a managed instance. And so that's pretty exciting from a DR standpoint.
100%.
And a migration standpoint. We're actually in the middle of a big on-prem to managed instance migration project for a customer.
Yep.
And when you choose MI, it sounds great, and it is great. We love the product. But it's like, hey, this is just like having a VM, right? Actually, it's really not. There's some things around authentication, around, I can't just say, hey, I have this SQL Server backup file, let's restore it. There's, how do you get the data there?
Yep.
So seeing them, bring MI just closer and closer to what, what a VM would look like, I think is great.
Yeah, much better. And so I love this is a huge step, I think, to getting, that adoption of Azure and, getting people from on-premises to the cloud. The other things around MI that they really spent a lot of time on in this session was new hardware generations, right? So they, everything's been on a kind of a Gen 2, and now you now have an option to pick a new, they call it the latest 3rd gen Intel Xeon processor, which gives you 2.8 gigahertz clock speed. They have new memory options. So they have two new memory options. There's a moderate memory and then a larger memory. They call it memory optimized. And a lot of people, even AWS is doing this memory optimized, offering, right? So, and the reason they're doing this is a lot of the feedback they're getting is that a lot of people are bringing their high intense workloads to MI and not getting the performance that they want, or that they need really. And the reason, Azure will uncover a lot of things, right? They may not perform as well as in the cloud, but so what they're doing now is they're saying we're going to give you a lot of these offerings to be able to handle those workloads. So things like up to 870 gigabytes of memory per instance, right? That's a lot, right? Now, obviously that comes with a cost, but that's there, and the prices or the price increases in the slides if you watch the thing, but they're supporting, you have now these two options to be able to handle these workloads, which is awesome because now you have, it used to be just, I think, what was it? General and standard. Now you have these additional ones that go, I need these work, and you can be flexible into, what, as you do the math, what workload do you need?
Yeah. I think, and they've done a lot of things even just like with VM sizes around this too, right? Because that's always been one of the knocks of the public cloud, whoever the provider is, is that your virtual machines come in defined sizes, right? This much memory, this many CPUs, you know, and in an on-premises environment, you know, if you're virtualized using Hyper-V or VMware or whatever, you know, I could say, I want this VM to have 512 gigabytes of RAM and be able to handle all the IOPS I can throw at it with 4 CPUs. Right? And that's extreme. I can't imagine a 4 CPU system that would need 500 gigabytes of RAM, but you can be very granular, you know, and we've seen some things, you know, they announced a new category of E-series, like EB5, I think, versus E5, memory optimized. The other thing, and this is a little bit of a tangent that we recently had the need for, they have introduced the concept of constrained CPU VM sizes. And this is actually pretty important. So in the situation where we're using it, actually this migration goes live this coming weekend, is, you know, an existing availability group in Azure, SQL 2016, very, very IO constrained. It's been around for a long time on these VMs, and so, you know, the vendor of this system specified we need this many IOPS, right? Well, if you go look at the VM sizes, to get the IOPS that we needed, and you know, this webinar is not about Azure VMs and disks and whatever, but just, you know, if you're not aware, the public cloud's a very different animal when it comes to configuring storage and listeners and things like that. So, you know, you end up taking multiple premium disks and striping them with storage spaces to get the IOPS you need. You know, they do have ultra disks now that you can specify the IOPS and the size, but it tends to be, so, in my experience, so cost prohibitive. You know, we haven't run into a situation where it makes sense yet with our customers. But essentially, you know, to get the IOPS that we needed, it's a 32 CPU virtual machine. Well, we have a 16 core SQL Server Enterprise license, right? We need this 32 CPU VM to get the IOPS that we need. So what Microsoft has is you can take that 32 CPU VM and there's a different SKU. It costs the same. You don't save any money on the cloud for this, but it only provisions or surfaces 16 CPUs so that you'll be in license compliance, right? So you get, you know, fewer CPUs, but the memory, the IOPS, everything that you need from the larger machine. So it's kind of the same thing with MI, right? You know, we know that SQL Server workloads vary a lot in terms of, you know, CPU, memory, IOPS, you know, and what that balance needs to look like. So
and I think that's what they're trying to do, is allow you to find that balance that's right for your workload, right? And so they did quite a few demos. So, you know, it's a 2.5-hour session, you know, and the link's there, go watch it, but it's actually really cool, the things that they're doing.
The other thing with MI, and I didn't dig into it the way that Scott did, that I noticed that's huge, because this is one that I think always comes as a surprise to a lot of people when they want to go to MI. Managed instance today only supports SQL Server standard logins or Azure Active Directory authentication.
Yeah, I was just going to go there, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And so what they're saying is that it will actually do Windows off Active Directory, and that's a really big one, because you know, if I'm migrating from an on-prem environment using Windows authentication, Active Directory to managed instance, you know, the infrastructure to make that all work and synchronize with Active Directory and single sign-on can be a hassle, but it's not as fast either, right? Because if you think about it, you make a connection using Windows off, it's going to call out to Azure AD to get a token to authenticate you. It's not as fast as local. So I think that's going to be a big one.
So and that's going to allow the migration, you know, this adoption, I think, much smoother, you know, all these things that do with MI. So there's a lot of good things, you know, 2 newer hardware series, you know, the premium series and the memory optimized premium series, you know, that come with this, you know, the new Gen 3 and additional storage, you know, max storage, a lot of great things around MI. You know, again, like I was mentioning, you know, as you move to these upper tiers, there is some cost, but you know, it's the cost was not quite the jump that I expected when I first watched the video. So go, you know, good demos there. I highly recommend if you're interested you know, at all remotely interested in MI, go watch that. But great things, you know, they're like Randy's saying, you're really trying to get that granularity to go, what's the right setting for my workload. So
yeah. I think a lot of this stuff, and if there was a theme that I saw in past this year,
yeah,
which makes sense with everything else we're seeing,
yeah,
it's hybrid, right?
yeah,
Which makes all the sense in the world. You know, we end up with all these buzzwords,
yeah,
right? But you know, 99.999, probably 59% of people using the cloud are hybrid.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
You know, and there's not a lot of people, they're out there, but you know, everyone seems to be dipping their toe into the cloud, you know, and so, you know, finding a you know, mid to large enterprise that doesn't have some cloud, some on-prem,
yeah,
that's never going to go away, right? You know, we run into folks who either have or are in the process of going 100% cloud, but that's
rare.
That's rare. Right. And so, you know, I think we're seeing that with all kinds of things. Jason, have we had any questions? I wanted to we're about halfway through, so I wanted to make sure we cover anything that we need to.
Yes, sir. We have two from Don.
Okay.
His first question, do containers get AD authentication yet?
There was a lot of stuff on containers and some improvements. I don't recall seeing that specifically. That's a pretty big one, right? That's a pretty big one. So it's a great question. I'll look into that one. So I don't recall hearing specifically that that's happening, but that would be great.
All right. Don's second question, is the parameter sniffing enhancement for standard as well as enterprise?
I think we probably don't know yet. It's you know, 2022, you know, public. In terms of timeline, all they would say is that they'll meet the name, right? So it could be December, a year from now,
Right.
You know, that we're talking about the release date of 2022. You know, the public preview will happen sometime next year as well. So that's always an interesting one, right? And as you look, you know, version to version, you know,
what do you get in standard?
What do you get in standard versus enterprise tends to move on you, you know, and I find myself, you know, even today, I'll be like, oh, you have standard edition, but then you have to think about, well, what version of standard edition, if that feature is there. I and others have advocated for a long time that, you know, I would love to see a scale-based licensing model instead of a feature-based licensing model from Microsoft. So, you know, kind of like SQL Express, right? You know, SQL Express with advanced features, you get all the features pretty much, but your database can only be 2 gigabytes. Right. So, you know, if licensing was based upon, you know, it already is based upon cores, but memory, you know, even IOPS, right? You know, I think that would be a great way because, you know, the thing that I always think about for enterprise-wise is online index rebuilds, right? We run into lots of customers who would hugely benefit from that, but you know, don't have the 6 figures to use enterprise versus standard in that environment. So, great questions. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out as we get into 2022.
So stay tuned, I guess, is the answer.
So let's talk about some more SQL Server 2022 stuff. You know, one of the things that I think is great is that, you know, SQL Server always just gets better, you know, every version. And you know, we do a lot of upgrades. It's a big part of what people hire us to help them with, you know, and a lot of people, you know, for whatever reason, don't upgrade their databases as often as they should. And so, you know, you have 2008 R2 end of life last year, you've got 2012 end of life coming up. And, you know, people will just be shocked that, you know, we go from like a 2012 to 2019 at the performance improvements you get just from the version change, right? And we're seeing the same thing here, you know, some great things coming for Temp Db. GAM contention, they're saying is no longer going to be an issue with Temp Db,
Wow.
which is huge. Some things around page latch concurrency on system pages, PFS pages, GAM pages, things like that. One of the really cool ones that was pointed out, they've added, so I don't try to remember off the top of my head what version what thing got implemented in, but recently we got low priority index rebuilds, right? Alter index with low priority,
Yeah.
right? So that is, you've got this long running index rebuild going on, online index, whatever. You're not impacting production. It's a low priority.
Yep.
They're introducing that for shrink database, right? Now, we don't advocate ever including shrinks in your regular maintenance plans, things like that. If there's something that I could remove from the SQL Server vocabulary, it would be truncate the transaction log, because that makes it sound like the transaction log should be getting smaller.
Yeah.
And it's not. We're clearing the transaction log and making it available for more transactions, right? And so you see people who are shrinking and growing and shrinking and growing. We never want to do that. That said, there are times things happen that we need to do a shrink. Maybe we purged a bunch of data from the database. Maybe we have a transaction log that grew like crazy because our log backups were failing, right? There are DBA operational things like, hey, we need to shrink this. And that's always been an issue. It's a very slow process. It's a very IO intensive process.
Mm-hmm.
So they've added that with low priority to shrink, so that you can just kind of have that running in the background. And, if it takes 3 times as long, who cares, right? Yeah. Because it's not impacting users.
But use it wisely.
Yeah, but use it wisely. The other one that I'm fascinated to see how this plays out, and when I get my hands on this, I don't have the bits yet for 2022. I'll be playing with for sure. Multi-write replication, right? So what they are claiming, and I say claiming because we've had merge replication, and anybody who's used it, especially when it was new, knows that merge replication with the accompanying conflict resolution is not for the faint of heart. But they're saying that this is going to be multi-master, last write wins, essentially, right? Replication. So, if they get this right, and I say that because this is hard to do. Anybody who's been around another enterprise vendor for a long time, who has a product called Rack. When they first implemented multi-master, right, in a Rack cluster, you have multiple instances of your database. You can read or write to them, and you have to synchronize that data. Rack was not easy to get working. One of those things that, when it worked, it's great, but there's a lot of issues with that. It's not an easy problem. So, but I'm excited to see how that plays out, because we have availability groups. We've back in the 2000s, early 2000s, I was a DBA at a company called Match.com, which you probably heard of, and we were on SQL Server 2000, and obviously had to scale out for that workload. And the way that you scaled out then is really different than how you'd scale out today. Right? We didn't have the options that we do. And so we have that for reads. We have a lot of tools to scale out reads right now. We don't have that for writes. They're really sharding, right? If you really need to scale out writes, sharding is where it comes down to, right? Where we're going to have, these databases or these tables or these rows on each of these things. And so a multi-write replication, it will be huge, if it works the way that it should. So I'm excited to see how that turns out. The other one that I don't know why this hasn't come along long ago. This is not a big a deal unless you need it, right? So we've had the XML data type for how long now?
2005.
Right? Yeah.
2005. Wrote a book on it. Now
Index compression for XML indexes.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So, you know, none of us. I don't love XML. I don't know anybody that loves XML. But if you're using it and you're storing it in the database, there's a lot of people who are storing a lot of data in these XML columns and querying it, right? And you know, we could get into good, bad practices, things like that. But you know, we've had regular index compression, page and row level, for a long time. Now getting that with XML is going to be good. So
that's interesting because there was rumor a while ago that XML data type was going away because they put in JSON.
Right.
And now this just says, nope, not going away. We're going to have to do something with it. Right. So that's interesting.
You know, I think it's like all deprecated features, right? You know, how many features do we have in the SQL 2019 engine that have been deprecated features for, you know,
several releases,
several releases,
right?
But you know, it's one thing to say, hey, let's get rid of this. It's another thing to tell your customers that have terabytes of data they're using that we're getting rid of it. So so yeah, that's
cool.
I think that'll be a good one.
Yeah.
So those are all, you know, I think really good things that we're going to see with 2022. Excited to start looking at it together. We have webinar. We have a slide at the end here. We're going to attempt to do a SQL Server 2022 webinar preview on February 22nd of 22. So 2022 on 2/22/22. So we thought that would be, you know, everyone's got to have a shtick for something, right?
Yeah.
So, but obviously we're going to need to get some good hands-on between now and then. So we'll see how that works.
Yeah.
But excited to be doing that. So,
cool.
And just hybrid, you know.
Hybrid.
So Scott.
Yep.
What was your next item?
Let's talk more hybrid with Azure Arc. We actually
did Arc.
Yeah. So just a quick background. I don't want to spend a lot of time on what it is because we just did a webinar a month or two ago on kind of introducing Azure Arc. So, but just as a quick recap, it's Azure Arc's this way. If you look at it, you know, everybody's got these multiple environments. You know, you manage them differently. The tools you use to manage these are different, and it's just becomes this this complexity of environments and how do you manage these. And what Azure Arc is this what Microsoft calls a single pane of glass to control all your different environments, the complexity and the diversity of your environments, right? That's what Azure Arc is. We did a webinar a couple months ago. They have released some, and I'm going to scroll up just more notes here real quick. They've released some new improvements on that. And I just want to spend a few minutes on that because it's actually really cool. We actually set it up so we've got a couple of our on-premises databases managed through the Azure portal. It's awesome, right? Because you can check the health, you can check status, you can check the overall availability and everything around your databases, right?
Absolutely. I mean, things like Azure Active Directory service principals.
Yep.
Right. If you have an on-premise server, you know, and you want to authenticate using Azure AD to something. This came up recently for us on a project for a customer with Azure Key Vault.
Yeah.
They wanted to store credentials securely in Azure Key Vault that they could access from an on-premise server. Well, if you're going to store the credentials to connect to Key Vault on the on-premise server, now you're really just moving the problem, right? It's not that much more secure. And so the way you would do that in Azure on a VM is you would have a service principal in Azure Active Directory that identifies that computer.
Mm-hmm.
And that is who gets role-based access control to Azure Key Vault. So if you're not that actual physical machine, that's how you're authenticating, right? Well, you couldn't do that on premise. Now you can with Azure Arc, right? Because what happens is your on-premise virtual machines become resources in Azure, just like VMs, right? And so things like that, things like, you know, Azure managed backups and patching, right? You know,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
I mean,
these are the kind of things that they've announced, that they're talking about now is, you know, AD authentication, automatic updates, including the ability, let's see, where you can schedule the updates when they can be applied. So think about it like a custom maintenance window, right? Here's when I want my maintenance to be applied, whether on premises or in the cloud, right? So automatic updates, the introduction of Kafka, which this one excited me, right? This is where I can feed the metrics, because, you know, Azure Arc is going to collect all this metric data, right, over a health thing. And where I can now, using Kafka, feed those metrics into any third-party monitoring system. So I can do reporting off of this information, right? That's kind of cool. They've introduced some business critical tiers to support HA, again, powered by distributed availability groups. That's kind of cool for DR scenarios. And they also introduced things like a Postgres SQL hyperscale for Azure Arc, right? This will be support high availability. I don't know a lot about PostgreSQL, but apparently from watching all of this, a lot of people are using PostgreSQL.
yeah,
Right?
I mean, I'm not a Postgres guy either. You know, I'm a SQL Server guy.
Right.
But you know, you don't have to be real good at reading the tea leaves to see, you know, over a few conferences.
Yeah.
You know, Microsoft from the Azure, they're talking about Postgres a lot.
A lot.
You know.
Yeah.
So
and you know,
it's
yeah. So that makes it interesting, right?
Yeah.
So you know, maybe in our free time, right? We, you know, start looking at Postgres. But the thing I liked about, you know, we started looking at Azure Arc quite a few months ago, and it's really been one of these things where, like, dang, this is awesome. It solves a lot of the, you know, again, the story is hybrid. It solves a lot of the issues where I've got all these different disparate, you know, different environments, complex. I've got on-premises stuff. I've got in the cloud stuff. How do I manage all of this? And, you know, and the whole story is, how do we keep making it easy? How does Microsoft keep making it easy to do all these things, right? So now, you know, and they keep applying stuff. There's another session that if you're very interested in, you know, how do I manage different environments? This is it, right? Because we've got a couple more webinars kind of queued up down the road about, you know, on Azure Arc, that, you know, the more we play with it, I think the more we get excited about it, right? Because this is stuff that we're, you know, we pitch to our customers and like, oh, this would be awesome, right? Because all these different environments.
And keep in mind too, when you're looking at Azure Arc, there's two very different or distinct things that fall under Azure Arc.
Yeah.
Right. And what we've really dug into, what we're excited about, is, you know, bringing on-prem resources into the cloud.
Yep.
To benefit from tools, for lack of a better term, management.
Yeah.
Right.
Single pane of
You
glass.
know,
Right?
and we're going to see more and more of that. You look at some of the stuff in security.
Yep.
In, you know, like Azure Sentinel, and there are things that are only available for platform as a service,
Yeah.
right? You know, MI, SQL DB, and there are some others that are available for that and Azure VMs in Azure.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, I haven't heard anything from Microsoft about this. The logical progression is going to say, hey, Azure Arc, now we can do, you know, some of the stuff that you get around security.
Right.
You know. So yeah, but the other side of Azure Arc, which is what the Postgres thing about, is the ability to run platform as a service, Microsoft services on premise, right? And the way that works is you have a Kubernetes cluster on-prem, and you have something called an Arc data controller, and now you can run like managed instance and things on-prem. And we're not seeing as big of I'm not excited about that, but I don't see it as a huge use case compared to the other way.
Yeah.
Right. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at the two when you hear Arc. Right. So the other thing on a related note, and we got about 10 minutes. That was they talked about it in that day one keynote, and then Bob Ward talked about it some too, is Azure Purview. Right. And this is potentially pretty exciting. This is data governance, data classification, right? So And we've seen some things on data classification and so forth that have come out in SQL Server recently.
Yeah.
But this is a cloud-based service that will connect to multiple data sources, whether those are on-prem, whether it's on-prem or cloud, whether cloud's Azure, AWS, whether it's Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, cloud databases, or and I'm sure we'll see more. And it will basically go, do that classification, pull this stuff in. And so, as we get more and more siloed, and as data breaches and zero trust and those security things become bigger, I think that's going to be pretty cool to see. It's one of the things I'm excited about playing with, and I imagine you'll see a webinar from us on it
down the road. Yep.
In the next quarter or two, because and it's and it was just kind of a quick demo to see how that works. But and to me, and our customers are primarily on premise.
Yep.
Right. We have some Azure projects, but we're not even 50-50 yet. I wouldn't say, maybe 70-30, 60-40, something like that.
There, yep.
And to me, the message of hybrid cloud and these things that we're seeing is, when people hear cloud, they're like, oh, I don't want to move. We don't want to move to the cloud,
Right.
Our application, right? We like having it on premise. Is saying, there are all these services that you get in the cloud that are, okay, well, let's go spend $1 million on this enterprise project to build this enterprise, data classification thing.
Right.
Or can we use Azure Purview for our on-prem stuff, right? And so I think, to me, that's the beauty of hybrid right now is, being able to leverage some of the services and things that you get in the cloud without having to move your workload to the cloud.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
We're seing a lot of cool stuff.
A lot of cool stuff.
A lot of cool stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
So.
And I'll you want me to keep going?
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. So I had two number threes. I am a huge fan. I don't know if you guys, let's go back a few years. If you guys remember Azure SQL Data Warehouse, and then you had, oh good grief, I just drew a blank.
Parallel Data Warehouse?
No, it was the, oh no, it was a PaaS service. And they combined these, can't believe I just drew a blank, into Synapse.
Synapse, right.
Right. And everybody's gonna text me to go here.
That's another 2022 thing.
Oh yeah.
Is linked to Synapse.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So kind of like so Polybase.
Yep.
Right. So we have Polybase to go link and pull in data and push data from other sources, and so having that SQL link.
Yeah. Yeah. I love Polybase. I'm a huge Polybase fan. So I'm not going to talk about Azure. Just go watch the session on because it's another hybrid scenario thing, and it just basically it's one of these things where I can start pulling in all these connectors to pull data in and process data. But the one I want to talk about is I'm always interested in learning and grokking about how do I improve my skills about on performance tuning, and Grant Fritchie did this session called 3 tools you already own, right? And how do you performance tune? And he really pulled it up to, and I'm going to pull up my notes here. Excuse my can I get to that? Yep. Yeah. So he basically he identified a bunch, but he really narrowed it down to just 3, and the 3 were depending on the your version of SQL Server, right? So if you're running 2005 or later, you've got dynamic management views. If you've got 2012 or later, you've got extended events. If you're using 2016 or later, you've got what Randy talked about earlier, query store. And what really surprises me is how many people, including some of our clients, do not use query store. Oh my goodness, please, if there's one takeaway from this.
I would go so far as to say that the vast majority of customers that we come across that are 2016 or higher are not using query store.
Yeah. And I'm like, why,
Yeah.
And, if this is, please, right, please. But one of the things that he really point out, and I see this in talking to a lot of our customers, is the difference between, you know, how do we understand it, and it's that it's what are execution plans, right? So, you know, there's all these metrics. We don't use just one because we have to look at I/O, we have to look at memory, we look at CPU. But then we get hung up around the execution plan, and he says the execution plan, this is not, this kind of went, wow, that he's right. This is execution plans are not a measure of performance. They explain, he goes, their explanation of the we call it, the explanation of the query behavior. It tells you what the query is doing, but it is not a measure of performance, right? You have to look at memory, CPU, I/O, and then look at the query plan to go, okay, what is the behavior of my query? And we get a lot of our customers and a lot of people we see get so hung up on the confusion of that we have to come back and go, that was a reminder for me to go, oh, he's absolutely right, right? We have to, you know, how do we use these things to tune queries, right? And he goes, this isn't a one size fits all. We have all these tools, and you're essentially going to use, you could use all three, right? Extended advanced query store. But I love the fact that he, you know, points these things out, right? And so that was a good one for me to go, you know, how do we use these tools? And I love that bullet point where it's just an explanation of the behavior. So that was awesome. So I would actually go watch that because he goes really deep into, you know, how to use these tools. So please, query store if you're using 2016 or later.
Absolutely. So we're about out of time, and my laptop over here that we're sharing the slides on is about to die too. So I wanted to throw the slide up here on the next webinar, SQL Server 22 v.next. Again, that's planned. We plan on doing it, assuming we have some good content by then. So really appreciate everyone coming, and would love to hear, you know, send us an email or, you know, comments, YouTube, whatever, on some of your takeaways from Summit. And as always, you know, things that you'd like for us to hear about. You know, if it's like, hey, that Azure Purview is really cool. If we get, you know, a bunch of people say, hey, let's learn Azure Purview, then that's something that we'll do.
Yep.
So, Jason, just do we have any other Q&A or anything before we wrap up?
Yeah, two quick Temp DB questions and then one comment. First one, GAM contention, does that mean no longer worrying about the number of Temp DB data files?
I would say no, because, you know, there's GAM contention is the reason that we think about, you know, that's one of the things we look at for multiple Temp DB files. But keep in mind that multiple files for any database, not just Temp DB, are going to benefit you, right? So one of the things that we run into is people are like, you know, with SANs and virtualized storage, you know, we're not putting this file on this set of spindles and this file on this set of spindles anymore, so it doesn't matter. And it does matter, right? And there's a very simple way for you to see how it matters. And what that is, do a strike backup. If you got a, you know, 500 gigabyte database that you're backing up to a single backup file on a volume, back that sucker up to 3 backup files, all of those files in the exact same location, and see how much faster it is. And it will be exponentially faster because we're writing to multiple files at the same time. And the same thing happens with your database engine, whether it's TempDB or user databases, right? So, you know, I guess I would say probably adding more files because of GAM contention may go away, but we still want multiple data files for sure. So, great question.
Okay, the next one might be too soon to answer this one. Is there a different way to clear Temp DB without restarting SQL Services with SQL 2022?
So, no idea if that will be the case. I guess I would be interested in what we mean by clear Temp DB, because I've not ever had to restart the engine due to Temp DB. you know, if we're trying to resize Temp Db or make changes. You know, I think it's probably like the plan cache thing, right? That, you know, if you know how to go find what's in Temp Db and who's using it and kill that session and kill those objects.
Yeah.
Or with the plan cache, remove a specific plan out of cache. That's the better way to do it. So no way of knowing if that would be part of this.
And then the comment from Don, PostgreSQL is a real ACID database as opposed to MySQL. Surprised to hear that Microsoft is embracing it.
It is or it is not.
He is surprised to hear that Microsoft is embracing it.
Right, but about an ACID database.
He says it is a real ACID database.
Oh, because it's a competitor to SQL Server, I guess is what the idea is there. You know, it's interesting to see. I mean, we have a very new Microsoft now than we did, you know, 10 plus years ago, right? In that, you know, if you're running Postgres in Azure or you're running SQL Server in Azure, sure, Microsoft gets some licensing money from there that they don't from Postgres, but I think what we're seeing is you know, Microsoft, you know, following the market, right? You know,
yeah, that's just it, right? You know, there was a gasp when I was at Microsoft. There was a gasp within Microsoft when they decided to run SQL Server on Linux, right? But you know, how many people run Linux? A lot, right? So that was. Then you have look at, you know, Azure Storage, right? Not only support Azure Storage, but there's, you know, MongoDB.
I guess the way I would look at it is this: if I'm Microsoft, and I have, you know, there's a market out there of people who are big into Postgres, and they can either migrate to SQL Server on Azure or go to AWS.
Yep.
That's probably not the choice I want to give them. I want to say, hey, you can run your Postgres here.
Yeah.
Because we all know that, you know, if you've ever been through it, if you've been around this industry for very long, you've at least been through people talking about it.
Yeah.
A wholesale, you know, change of the DBMS you're using. It doesn't happen,
No.
You know, not in enterprises, right? I mean, the
Right.
cost is just prohibitive. So, you know, I mean, open source is here to stay. It has its place. Microsoft has embraced it. So,
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely
Yeah.
a fascinating time to be alive.
Yeah.
For sure. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Hope that this was worth your time. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you in February to talk about
2022.
So looking forward to that.
Thanks, everybody.